Hi, I'm Matt Goodman. This is what brought me into the position of not just supporting the Greens, but making it part of my own identity. Why I am being green. This is my dad. Currently, he's suffering from dementia, and I guess recently that has caused me to reconsider where I get my values and what has shaped me. I was born in Innisfail, far north Queensland. We lived on a banana farm, but my dad had a dream of being a grazier, so when I was 3, we moved to a 4,400 hectare cattle property near Baralaba, central Queensland. A couple of years after we arrived, our region suffered through a severe drought. I've spent most of my life feeling this was a really poor decision that subjected our family to years of hardship and put us at the mercy of intermittent floods and droughts, not to mention isolation. I hated and resented my childhood, as I never felt that I belonged in that community. I spent my time counting the days until I could leave home and go to boarding school for years 11 and 12. Politically, Dad was a staunch National Party supporter. That means this guy, Joh Bjelke-Petersen, was his hero. Those familiar with Queensland in the 80s will know that his law and order police state turned out to be riddled with corruption and put a stain on Queensland's reputation that had been difficult to shift. I don't think Dad appreciated me wearing this shirt, but he never tried to stop me. At his heart, I think he believed in political freedom, even if his political champions did not. The nearby town to us was Woorabinda. Woorabinda is an Aboriginal town that was essentially created in 1927 as a dumping ground for dispossessed Aboriginal people from across central Queensland. They'd already been pushed into an area near Taroom, but then it was decided to build a dam over their home, so they were forced marched over 250 kilometres to Woorabinda. That march would have taken them through our property. It's a march the locals reenacted 90 years later, but it was not well known to us growing up. Unsurprisingly, this dumping of people in a low-quality land area has not resulted in a thriving community. Unemployment runs around 70%. Of course, that dam was never built. Our two small towns became entwined by their need to send their kids to a school they couldn't run off from, and our need to fill in the football team. I'll never forget watching those amazing kids slowly realise the bleakness of their own future, and one by one turn to some sort of substance abuse by the time they turned 15. Having counted the days to leave Baralaba, I found myself an atheist in a Catholic boarding school in Toowoomba. Here, once again, I thought to myself, I just have to get through these 2 years and then life will get good. Put most of my effort into schoolwork, was determined that I would get a good job so I would never suffer poverty again, nor have my freedom curtailed. Having done well in school and without any real experience of the wider world, I did what I thought was the next logical step. I moved to Brisbane and studied computer systems engineering. 2 years later, I was living on rice and potatoes. I couldn't afford textbooks and I was still miserable. I'd spent 20 years living entirely for the future without any real sense of things getting better. By this time I'd taken a few walks in tourist parks and seen a few signs like this. This seemed to me like a good philosophy for life. I dropped out of university, abandoned ambition and tried to lead a small, simple life that would have minimal impact on the planet. After a couple of years, I went back and finished that degree, but really only to prove to myself I could. Not long afterwards, I met my wife and moved to Scotland to be with her. I became a chef partly so that if I was ever reduced to rice and potatoes again, I could at least make them taste good. But also, I felt this was an honest way to earn a living without causing harm to the planet or society. This thought theory was always in conflict with the reality of my work. I often worked with unsustainable produce. Myself and my colleagues were increasingly asked to work long hours for a salary that did not attract overtime payments. I accepted it as a truth that this was simply how things had to be in my line of work. Of course, the rest of society should not put up with those conditions, but we were special. We were different, and all those people we saw dropping out just couldn't hack it. In some way, it was a sign of just how special we were. Eventually, after we'd already moved back to Australia and settled in Melbourne, I too burned out and found myself jobless without any sense of direction. By this time, I'd already joined the Greens because they seemed to be the only ones who understood that persecuting people who were fleeing a war zone was unethical. My mindset of living a small life, I looked forward to supporting the wonderful candidates who would run at the next election. Funny thing happened though. While everyone was warm and welcoming, I felt more at home in the branch than I had anywhere else. The multitude of willing candidates for the council election just didn't exist. Guess I've always been interested in politics, but I'd let others' distaste put me off. I couldn't just let there be a void in the place where we had run before though. As they say, be the change you want to see. Having committed to politics, I took the opportunity to work for Sam Dunn, our Eastern Metro Greens MP at the time. Through her, my eyes were open to the destruction going on under our nose in what should be the Great Forest National Park. But I also saw a familiar pattern in some of my colleagues. My work is too important for me to expect to have the working rights that I strive to achieve for other people. It's a pattern I've seen often now that I know what to look for. A lot of us are overworked, disrespected at work until we feel lucky to have a job and special for being able to put up with it. As well as this, we all seem to be caught in a cycle of working harder to be able to afford a nicer home, with bigger walls between us and our neighbours, which cuts us off from each other so that our only community is our work, which gets further away each time the traffic gets worse. And I've come to realise that while I've been trying to have a minimal impact, others haven't been so careful. This is the coal mine in my hometown. These are the logging coops in Tulangi Forest, hidden from view from the town, but not from the satellite. And here is the bleached coral of Queensland, a massive disaster that is largely ignored because it's under the waves. I used to think that all this had made me a very different man from my father. I guess I'm starting to realise that everything we do is built on the experiences of those who come before us. My dad, like me, wanted to live a simple life. I can't sit on the sidelines anymore though. My dad, like me, did not think the government should interfere in our private lives. I, however, understand that that's a freedom that should be extended to everyone. My dad, like me, didn't judge people by the colour of their skin, but I don't think he understood the systemic odds that are stacked against non-white people, just as he couldn't see the system stacked against himself. So I guess that brings me here. I wasn't always destined to be a campaigner. Green politics is not my heritage, but I'm determined to fight for what I believe in. I'm determined to keep opening the door to others who might not be the core demographic to join us, creating a better world.